The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
There's one issue everyone agrees on. Traffic congestion is terrible. We talked to two San Mateo County leaders who say something can be done about it. The game is transportation. The game is on. Hi, I'm Kevin Mullen. Welcome to the game. This November, San Mateo County voters will decide on a half-cent sales tax increase that will direct money to a series of projects and programs intended to do one thing: make it easier for all of us to get around San Mateo County. Joining us to talk about this ballot measure are Dave Pine, president of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, as well as Belmont City Councilman Charles Stone, who chairs the San Mateo County Transit Board of Directors. And I want to thank you both for being on the game. Mark Simon is on assignment. In other words, out on vacation. He will be back, so I'm flying solo today, but talking about an issue that's near and dear to my heart, but also to these gentlemen across the table from me. So let's give a little bit of background. The kind of run-up to the decision to put a half-cent sales tax measure on the November ballot. There was something called the Get Us Moving campaign, which, as I understand it, was a 9-month outreach effort. Charles, let's start with you, since you're on that Samtrans board and really helped direct this. What was that Get Us Moving program all about? What were some of the elements of that outreach? And what were you hearing back from the public about what's going on in our county when it comes to transportation?
Well, you know, recently Supervisor Slocum mentioned that in his history of involvement in San Mateo County, he hasn't seen a more robust outreach effort than the Get Us Moving effort. And that's what this was. This was our attempt to reach out to the community writ large, including various stakeholder groups like businesses, labor, environmental groups, a technical advisory group made up of representatives from cities up and down the peninsula, and say, you know, what would you like to see? What do you think we need? What are your priorities if we're going to try to tackle this traffic congestion issue? And in addition to reaching out to them and seeing what they thought, it was also a two-way dialogue. It gave us an opportunity to tell them about some of the challenges the San Mateo County Transit District faces. For instance, a lot of people don't know that right off the bat, off the top of our budget every year, comes a $20+ million debt payment for the BART Millbrae station, which is a great station. It takes 100 million road miles off the road, but that certainly costs us a lot of money as a small bus organization, and there's a lot we could do if we didn't have that debt service. We had 14,000 discrete responses, which is pretty amazing. We sent out a survey, a widespread survey, got a lot of feedback that way. We had a website, got a lot of feedback that way. And in addition to the survey and online and the physical survey, we had a really nice budget czar tool, which allowed people to kind of play around with, all right, you can't have everything you want. If you have to prioritize your needs, where would you plug in different percentages for different items of importance? So we feel really good about that process, and we've had a wide coalition of people come together to give us feedback, and now they've come together to say, yes, we think you should put this on the ballot and we'll support it.
So Supervisor Pine, you're the president of the Board of Supervisors. You represent District 1 on the board. Remind folks what those cities are that you represent. And what do you hear from your constituents most often when it comes to the issue of transportation and mobility and just moving around this economically robust county we have of ours?
Well, I do represent District 1 on the Board of Supervisors, and communities in my district are Burlingame, Hillsborough, Millbrae, San Bruno, South San Francisco. I also serve on the Caltrain board and the Samtrans board, so deeply immersed in transportation matters. One thing just to add to Charles's comments on the preparation for this ballot measure is that the county and Samtrans have really formed a partnership to bring this matter forward. So this is somewhat of a different approach than we've seen in past transportation measures, where the county is really partnering with Samtrans to both design the measure and actually to take the legal step to put it on the ballot. So that is, I think, added to the momentum to get this done. But back to your question as what I'm hearing, people just are extraordinarily frustrated with the ever-growing congestion on the peninsula. We are the beneficiaries of one of the best economies in the country, but with that comes more people trying to get to work, and people are looking for solutions. So
Right.
There's a lot of frustration out there.
So lowest unemployment rate in California. It might be the lowest unemployment rate in the country. And we hear these statistics, 19 jobs being created for every one housing unit being created. So folks are traveling from all over the region to this job center of the Bay Area. So that certainly gives impetus. If you're a commuter that lives in San Mateo County trying to get around, you have major issues there. So let's define this sales tax effort. So the SamTrans board has actually formally put this forward, but it also needs the Board of Supervisors' stamp of approval, so to speak, to go to the voters. But what are we talking about here? Half-cent sales tax. What's the overall duration of this thing? How much money could it generate? And then we'll get into a discussion around where this money is actually going to be spent if, in fact, the voters adopt this with a 2/3 vote, I should say, a very high threshold for this to even take effect. But Charles, kind of walk us through that.
Sure, and Supervisor Pine is absolutely right. I mean, this couldn't have been done without the county's partnership, and I think that's part of the reason it's such a strong effort. And I'm hopeful that the Board of Supervisors is going to adopt this shortly. The SamTrans board has acted. They acted unanimously to say we want to put this in front of the voters in November. It would be a 30-year half-cent sales tax. That means for every dollar that you spend, it would be a half-cent out of that dollar. And it generates a tremendous amount of desperately needed funds for the San Mateo County Transit District. It's projected to bring in about $80 million a year. Half of that money would be dedicated toward public transit. I know we're going to get into the allocation a little later, but I think in addition to the partnership between the Board of Supervisors, the county, and the San Mateo County Transit District, that's another thing that makes this measure very special. I think for the first time, public transit is really getting its fair share of the expenditure plan.
And Dave, at the Board of Supervisors, you're still going to be taking this up in terms of getting board support. Do you anticipate any pushback from your colleagues or members of the public here? Nobody likes to pay more taxes, period, but that's balanced against the needs that people are seeing and are apparent every day in this county. So what kind of pushback might you get, or will this be pretty smooth sailing at the board level?
I anticipate it will be smooth sailing at the Board of Supervisors, and that's a reflection of the intense amount of dialogue that's gone on over the last 9 months. All of my colleagues have had a hand in contributing ideas and providing input throughout the process. There's been various advisory committees that colleagues have served on. So, we've already coming together on this, and I think it will be straightforward when it comes to us for formal action.
Right. And there have been previous sales tax measures put into place of a more general nature, but also transportation related. Do either of you anticipate concerns from the public that, hey, didn't we just vote on something like this? Doesn't the county already have something in line for these projects? So what we're going to do is, we're running out of time in our first segment. We're going to hold that question because we need to get into this sort of where the public is on this, because with the 2/3 vote threshold, you really can't have any opposition, frankly, any organized opposition to something like this, or it could be a difficult lift. So we'll get into all of those aspects when we return on the game in just a moment.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the game. I'm your host, Kevin Mullen. We are talking with Charles Stone, a Belmont City Councilman who also chairs the San Mateo County Transit District Board of Directors, as well as President of the Board of Supervisors, Dave Pine, in left-to-right fashion here on the set at Peninsula TV. I want to thank you again both for being here. We are talking about a sales tax measure that we expect to be going to the vote of the people this November. The voters of San Mateo County will have a chance to weigh in, but it's a 2/3 threshold, and that is a high threshold to meet for something like this. And Dave, I wanted to turn to you. Before the break, I mentioned that the public may have in their mind that we just voted on something similar to this, a sales tax increase of some type. Describe what Measure K is and what it funds and how this would be distinct from that. But is there an issue there with educating the public about what these various funding pots are? Transportation is inherently multi-layer, multi-agency with lots and lots of elements. And even as a policymaker who's immersed in this, it can get pretty confusing on how all of these funding streams work. So kind of talk to us about some of the distinctions there on this new measure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, anytime you go out to the voters and ask for a tax increase, that's a significant thing to do. And you have to put it in the context of what you've asked for in the past. In San Mateo County, we passed a 1/2 cent sales tax back in 2012. That was a general sales tax to fund just a broad array of county services. So because of those, the voters' generosity in passing that measure, we've been able to make substantial investments in parks, in childhood literacy, and mental health services, and road repairs. A great deal of important work has been done as a result of that measure. So when it was passed in 2012, it was referred to as Measure A, and then it was extended in 2016, now referred to as Measure K. So the voters, it's been really 6 years since we've gone out with an ask for a new tax, but the voters did renew it more recently. Perhaps more importantly is the fact that there have been other transportation taxes and costs that are come to the forefront, particularly the Regional Measure 3, which was just on the ballot, where the tolls were raised on the state-owned bridges. So voters have seen that recently. In San Mateo County, probably fewer people pay those tolls than in the East Bay, but nonetheless, it was a revenue measure. And then, of course, with the legislation that Senate Bill 1 in California, that did increase the gasoline tax. So there have been some asks of the voters, and we are appreciative of that and understand that we need to be very clear about the benefits of this new measure.
Right. So Charles, talk about that dynamic, and then we'll dig into the spending plan here. But just the overarching politics and the backdrop in which we're operating of the various transportation measures, state, regional, local. These things are all working in concert potentially, but that educational effort has to happen with the public, that they understand that they are layered and they actually build upon each other. They are not, if we've passed one, we don't need to pass the other. But that's a really tricky message to communicate to a county our size. Would you concur with that challenge? And how do we go about doing that?
Well, I mean, that's the $2.4 billion question, isn't it? In an age where everyone's busy, especially here in Silicon Valley, nuance is difficult and complexity is difficult. First off, though, I'm going to thank you, and because without your leadership and the leadership of the folks in Sacramento, we wouldn't have SB 1. And Senate Bill 1, for those who don't know, is going to help California claw its way out of a decades-old, massive deferred infrastructure maintenance and repair problem. Without SB 1, you're not going to have fixed roads in California. It's that simple. And that's how I think of that. There's money for other things in SB 1 as well, but when I try to message this for folks, I try to get them to think about the fact that California has a billions of dollars infrastructure problem, and we have neglected our roads maintenance for a long time. And so that's one of those things that's over here, and it works in concert with other things like our potential measure, which is designed specifically for transportation. Is there a little bit of money for other things? Absolutely, because we're trying to respond to what the voters told us they want to see. And one of those things was we'd like some money in there for potholes and street repair as well, which is fine. But primarily, this measure is aimed at public transit and transportation and highway congestion relief projects. We can really take a page from regions like Los Angeles and Seattle that have kind of led the way. And candidly, I'm a little disappointed that we're not leading the way anymore, but I think we can catch up. The Seattle region, for instance, 2 years ago passed ST3, which was a $53 billion regional measure, not a statewide measure, just a regional measure to really tackle the traffic issues in that region. We're going to have to build up to something like that. And, you know, I'm a real fan of Governor Brown's. I don't think he's done everything right. I have some criticisms, but on the whole, I think he's been a wonderful governor. And I really like the honesty and transparency he showed a few years back when there was an education measure on the ballot. And he basically said, folks, if you want to have the level of education we have, you're going to have to vote for this, or else we're going to have to make cuts. And it's sort of the same thing here. None of us wants to pay more taxes. But the great thing about taxes like this, countywide taxes, is we know the money's going to stay here, and it's going to make a difference in San Mateo County residents' lives. Their quality of life is going to improve because of this measure. And I'm not going to sit here and tell people this will be the last tax we have to pass. We're going to have to continue to look at more revenue sources if we're serious about making traffic congestion a dinosaur of the past. If we're willing to put up with this, we know how to do the status quo. If we really want to have dynamic change, it's going to be costly because projects like the Dumbarton Rail Corridor, for instance, are over $1 billion. These are very costly projects, and there are private partners stepping up to help. They're doing their part. The state has done its part with SB1. The regional measure, RM3, is doing its part. Now it's our turn in San Mateo County to do our part.
And Dave, generally, do we see when there's a local measure, local voters in this county have been pretty generous when they know that the money primarily is going to stay local?
I think that's completely accurate. When you look at San Mateo County voters' support of school bonds, school parcel taxes, county measures, voters have been generous, and I think our voters understand that these services are important, and sometimes you need to find some local revenue.
That's right.
We've been successful in that in the past.
Great. Okay, we are going to take a quick break. We will be back, and then I promise we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what will actually be funded if the voters pass this. You're watching The Game. We'll be back in a moment.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
I'm Kevin Mullen. We're back on The Game. We're talking with Charles Stone, the chairman of the SamTrans board here in our county, as well as the president of the Board of Supervisors, Dave Pine. And we're talking about a potential sales tax measure going before the voters in November of this year. So, Supervisor, wanted to turn to you about this spending plan, the $80 million or so that will be generated annually over a 30-year lifetime. Charles mentioned a big chunk of this goes to public transit, public transportation. I think half of it, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
What are some of the other categories that will be funded, and how will it affect people's lives?
Sure. Let me give you a quick overview. And I think one of the challenges anytime you put together an expenditure plan is you want to have enough specificity so voters understand where their money is going. But these measures go over 30 years, so you also need some flexibility to change the future circumstances. So just going over we've set up different expenditure buckets. So the first, where half of the proceeds will be allocated to, is public transit, specifically the support SamTrans and Caltrain. So those are, the backbone of our public transit system. We have a lot of exciting plans for enhancing services in both of those operations. So, that is, critical to get people out of their cars, and those two transportation agencies, need this funding to grow their ridership and really adapt to the modern transportation needs. In addition, there's another 10%, which is really also public transit in many respects. It's to promote transportation into the county, so through public transit assets. So, for example, like perhaps express bus service over the Dunbarton Rail. Looking at transit opportunities to get people in and out of the county. So we're at 60% so far. Another large bucket is highways, where there's 22.5%. And there was a lot of debate among the stakeholder group about how much should we be, investing in, let's say, traditional transportation modes such as highways. But there are, specific investments that we desperately need to make.
So we're talking interchanges.
Interchanges, right, about the turn. Yeah, choke points. For right, and we can see what a big difference those make. Recently at 92 in El Camino in San Mateo, a project was done there. It's made a world of difference, and we have plenty of checkpoints, and those are expensive projects. Right. Rounding out the expenditures, so we have 12.5% for local transportation initiatives, and this is divided into two segments. First, 10% will be allocated to the cities in accordance with a formula, and they can invest those monies as they see fit for local transportation needs, with a priority on improving road maintenance. And the remaining 2.5% is dedicated to grade separations. And that's not a lot of money given the scope of this problem, which is hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. But it will at least help some of the planning process to go forward.
So explain for the public, we all know what grade seps are.
Thanks.
Enormously expensive, but explain what that is in practical terms for the public.
Right. Well, the Caltrain corridor goes down through the heart of the peninsula, and therefore, crosses many major roadways. And over the years, we've been working hard to separate the roads from the tracks so that the cars aren't backed up and there's more safety for the rail service. We have, I believe, 32 crossings of the rail today that are not separated by either raising the tracks or lowering the road. So we have a lot of these grade separations to think about. And with Caltrain moving quickly towards electrification and really ambitious plans over the decades ahead to substantially increase the ridership on Caltrain, the grade separation and the east-west traffic flow becomes a bigger and bigger question. I know in my city, in Burlingame, for example, the Broadway, where Broadway crosses Caltrain is a major, causes major gridlock and a lot of safety concerns.
Right.
So there's an allocation to at least continue that planning process. In the long run, we'll need substantial help from federal government, state government, unknown sources.
Absolutely.
And the last bucket, I believe I've covered them, is there'll be 5% for bicycle and pedestrian transportation modes.
Right.
And it's really been exciting to see how the growth, particularly in bike transportation around the peninsula.
Yeah, you see it around the peninsula, the bike lanes, and there's a constituency there that is very active and vocal on making sure we are bike and pedestrian friendly in the county. So Charles, we have about 3 minutes left here. Express buses versus regular buses. Explain that. And how do we get people riding buses? Just commute buses and buses to move people around weekdays and weekends. How do we get people riding transit?
Sure. Well, that's the holy grail, right? They're referred to as choice riders, people who have the ability to take a car or other mode of transit but choose to take the bus. And capturing those riders is the holy grail for every bus organization. I think one of the ways we tackle that is with the express buses. And thanks to your leadership, we have money to fully fund managed lanes throughout Highway 101 in San Mateo County. And what that's going to do is enable express buses to get from point A to point B on 101 faster, because at the end of the day, Wi-Fi, relaxing chairs are good. That kind of stuff can help attract ridership. But it's the simple things that really have been proven to get choice riders on the bus. Can I get from where I am to where I need to be as fast or faster than in my car? Is it affordable in some sense compared to my car? Is it safe? Is it clean? Is it reliable? You get those things right and people will ride. And we see it already with the private sector buses. There are plenty of people taking what are essentially express buses. We call them Google buses, but there are really lots of big companies that run them. And for every one of those big companies, there's a smaller company of 50, 100, 200 that can't afford to run their own buses. We think there's an untapped market of folks there that would gladly get on something, say, branded as SamX rather than a Samtrans bus. And, you know, it's a bus with Wi-Fi, so they can work on it while they're getting to their job. And that's the beginning of it to me. That's the tip. How we tackle riders of my generation, a 43-year-old person that has their own car and lives in the hills of Belmont, that's a little tougher, but I think we can get there as well.
Excellent. Well, a lot more to talk about. We'll bring you back in the future to talk about this. And a very long ballot in November with multiple measures. And it'll be interesting to see what the voters of San Mateo County do with this measure. So I want to thank from left to right Charles Stone, Chairman of the Samtrans Board of Directors, and President of the Board of Supervisors, Dave Pine. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Kevin.
We want to thank you for watching. I'm Kevin Mullen. We'll see you next time on The Game.